I'm in Totnes in South Devon. It's a beautiful, still morning. No one's really up yet. And we're here to take the tide all the way down the Dart to Dartmouth, looking for the ghosts of our maritime past. Because all around the UK, in rivers, in streams, in the reeds, in the mud on the side of riverbeds, are the remains of our maritime past, and the extent of it is astonishing. In 2013, a survey around the UK identified 199 different assemblages of hulks, remains of craft. And they found paddle ships, they found ferries, steamboats, sailing ships, fishing boats, submarines. And they all tell our maritime history. And that helps us understand who we are today. So let's go and see what we can find. I've got past the first bit of river now. We're well clear of Totnes and it's just unbelievably beautiful. The little buzz of the sound at Totnes has gone. I can just hear birds and cows. Just saw a seal breathing out through his nose very crossly and then vanishing. It's an incredibly ancient place. Makes you wonder how long all of these trees, this woodland has been here. And then Devon itself is a very important place. It's so connected. You have the north coast, leads to the Bristol Channel, to Wales, Ireland, up to Liverpool, Glasgow. And then the south coast to France, to the Bay of Biscay, to the Iberian Peninsula. And both coasts give brilliant access to the Atlantic and to the trade systems of the world. There's been so much maritime history here. Think of all the people who sailed past the Devon coast. Francis Drake or Captain Cook on their way around the world, Horatio Nelson with huge fleets of warships setting off to carve out a little piece of empire to change the history of the world. There were U-boats off the coast of Devon, the Titanic came past, all those people migrating to America. And all of those deep ocean stories are connected to places like this. Connected to the inside of Britain by estuaries, by rivers, just like this. So yes, this maritime history really is part of all of Britain. The story of us all. One of the things I love about being an historian and archaeologist in places like this is that these liminal areas, the spaces between the land and the water, are constantly changing. You have to be really careful trying to find what you're looking for. And even when you do know where it is, it can constantly change. You have to be like a historical adventurer, and you're constantly being challenged. What I'm looking for now is a beautiful Edwardian paddle ship, about 90 feet long, huge paddles that would churn up this beautiful green water. And she's around here somewhere, just don't know exactly where. So this is the Kingswear Castle, once a magnificent Edwardian paddle ship, and a surprising amount of her remains. On the side there, where her paddle boxes would have been, two huge paddle wheels, each one 3 meters in diameter, more than twice my arm spread. And it would have churned up these beautiful waters, carrying people on trips from Dartmouth all the way to Totnes. And it's a relic of this period of peace and innocence before the world was scarred and torn apart by the 2 world wars. It was beautifully fitted out, mahogany in the saloons, upholstered. There was even hot water amenities, so you could just about imagine an Edwardian barista knocking you up an oat milk latte with a shot of vanilla if you were lucky. Now, she wasn't requisitioned during the First World War, and unusually carried on with those trips. There's much less capacity, there were fewer of them, fewer people on board, but they kept going. And I love that story of keeping calm, carrying on, even though the world was tearing itself to shreds over in northern France. There was a little bit of peace, a little bit of normal England carrying on here. And in this age of COVID, of us doing our best to keep calm and carry on, I think that's a story that really resonates. You have to use your imagination a bit, but I reckon if you try hard enough, you can just about see her. You can just about imagine the luxury, the magnificence, the excitement of coming down. We know that people came down from the north and the Midlands, all the way from Halifax to explore this part of Devon. It would have featured in many people's holiday memories. A wonderful thing. It's a completely different type of ship this. The Kingswear Castle, made of steel, propelled by steam and those huge paddle wheels. And this, a timber-built sailing ship, a ship that propelled itself with the wind, which of course is free. This was called the Glory, a magnificent ship, a Brixham trawler. And there used to be 400 of these in Brixham Harbour, and now there are just 2 left. Very sad tale. Built for speed, built to get out to the fishing grounds of the channel as quickly as possible, and to fish all day, and then to race back to make sure that the catch was fresh. Magnificent trapezoidal sails in a dark red, very distinctive. Now we know that this was built roughly the same time as the Kingswear Castle, but she was active during the First World War. A number of trawlers carried on fishing. They had to carry on catching those fish to keep the country going, and a lot of them were sunk by U-boats. and if they were lucky, the U-boat would surface and give them a warning before sinking them. So lots of the trawlers like this, which actually operated during the First World War, are now lost to us. They're all at the bottom of the sea in the English Channel. So it's very rare indeed to be able to see one. But just being here, you can see how the tide is tearing her apart, just taking bits away every time. And for a ship called the Glory, well, not really glorious at all anymore. The tide's well on the way out now, and you can really get a sense that this is a place of rhythms. You have the tide going in and then going out again, of course, but then on top of that you have extremely high tides. You have spring tides and then neap tides, and it's those hugely high tides that allow very large vessels to sail all the way up the Dart, all the way to Totnes. But more than that, it's a place of different types of rhythms. It's very different now in the middle of summer. We have these beautiful long days. You should come here in winter, the short days, it's cold and you have storms. But now the summer brings the tourists, people here walking up and down, absolutely loving the environment. And it makes you realise just how much the use of this area has changed over time. In the Elizabethan period, people would have used the river to travel, to communicate, for their livelihood. The idea of spending a nice bit of time down here, that would have been completely alien. But it's these rhythms as well that allow ships like this to survive. The tide helps protect them. It saves them in the mud as well as it destroys them. It's somewhere between a lover and a thief. This, I think, is my favourite one so far. This is the Effort. It's another timber-holed sailing vessel from the early years of the 20th century, just like the Glory round the corner. But the Effort was a coastal trader, not a fishing boat. So these are one of tens of thousands of traders in British maritime history, which just plied their trade, sailing from A to B, carrying goods, whatever they may have been. Well, a lot of lime was carried up here, and you have to imagine this not as a empty estuary just full of people enjoying it with their yachting and their canoeing and their paddleboarding, but as a motorway, as somewhere that's completely crammed full of people making their living, carrying goods and people from A to B. She had an interesting role in the Second World War. Now, Dartmouth was a very important place. It was the headquarters for a large portion of American troops, and that meant that it could be bombed. And one of the sure ways to protect somewhere like this from bombing was to use barrage balloons. And barrage balloons needed a strong point upon which they could put a winch, and attached to the winch were steel cables, and attached to the steel cables were these enormous balloons. So although the sky is empty now, imagine back in the Second World War, it would have been full of barrage balloons, balloons put there to stop enemy aircraft getting too close and bombing those precious strategic places. It was a very dangerous job, and we know the Effort wasn't destroyed, but she was damaged enough to have her brought up here and to end her career. And this is all that's really left of her now. You can see quite clearly how she was constructed, the ribs down here and the whole planking on the side. It always makes me feel a little bit like a paleontologist when I come and see a hulk like this. Like it's the rib cage of a giant dinosaur from years and years ago. all sorts of scavengers have come to feed on the carcass. And that, I suppose, is true. Timber, very, very valuable, especially really good seasoned timber in the curious shape that you have it for a ship. And there'll be bits of this boat all over the place. They'll be in fence posts, in gates, and one of the places you always have to check is in local churches. If you imagine the roof of a church, looking up at the roof, actually the timbers there are very much like it's a ship turned upside down. So if you need your roof mended with a little curved piece of timber just so, often the hulk of a ship is the best place to come. And although this is the obvious thing to see, the moment you get your eye in, you look all around you, there are little pieces of this ship. There's a huge debris field. You can imagine people coming down, smashing it up, taking a little bit away, taking it home to be repurposed, to be recycled. I've made it halfway. It's time for the obligatory Devon ice cream. Strawberries and cream, very nice. This is the Dittisham ferry, and it comes to somewhere called the Greenway Quay. And Greenway is a fascinating place. There's been a house here for hundreds of years, and we know that there was a Tudor house here. Not only that, a very famous person used to live in that Tudor house, none other than Sir Walter Raleigh. And here's the man who, the end of the 16th century in the 1590s, and again in the early years of the 17th century, sailed to try and find El Dorado. So you can imagine a Tudor gentleman appreciating the beauty of this place, but deciding to leave it all and to go and try and find a city made out of gold. Now, because there was a Tudor house here, this was also a very important location during the Spanish Armada campaign of the summer of 1588, when Philip II of Spain sent an enormous fleet of over 130 ships to invade Elizabeth I's England. That armada, that fleet, sailed past Dartmouth, and 11 ships sailed out to join the English to help them. Shortly afterwards, the English captured the first ship of the entire campaign, a Spanish ship called the Rosario. The Rosario was brought back here, and all of her crew were made captive, and they were enslaved, and they levelled the ground on the estate up there. So although you see tourists like me having ice creams and cups of tea and cream teas here, you've almost got to imagine a load of bedraggled Spaniards who've just been made captive, coming to an uncertain fate. But perhaps they were relieved. Everyone on board those ships was starving before they even came into the English Channel, and they were lucky enough to have survived. So perhaps they too quite liked coming here. We're now down at the boathouse on the Greenway estate. It's a wonderful, quiet little spot on the banks of the Dart, and perhaps it was here or near here that those bedraggled Spanish prisoners of war came ashore. That Tudor house was lost at some point in the 17th century, rebuilt in the 18th century, the early 1700s, and then it had a fairly quiet life until 1938, when there was a new chapter in the history of this magnificent estate. And it wasn't a chapter in a book about maritime history, no, it was a chapter in a murder mystery, because this estate was bought by none other than Agatha Christie. And I love the idea of her sitting here, writing her novels, looking at the beauty of what's happening in front of her, but also writing about the darkness in men's souls. Now there's a contrast for you. river's really changing here. It's so different to what it was like up at Totnes. So much wider. You can sense the sea, it's not far away at all. You get a feeling that you're entering a part of the river where serious events could take place, serious things that could change the history of the world, and we're certainly coming up to one just round the corner here. In fact, it's one of the most important and significant and large military operations in history. These great concrete scars or ribs perhaps on the foreshore of the Dart here are left over from D-Day, from June 1944, when the Allies fought to reclaim northern France from the Germans. It was the largest amphibious operation in history, and places like this were crucial for its success. It's an LCT repair station, LCT standing for Landing Craft Tank. And they were some of the most important maritime vehicles that took troops, that took vehicles, that took supplies across the Channel. 850,000 men, 150,000 vehicles, 570,000 tons of equipment. And a lot of people don't realise this about D-Day, but it wasn't just the initial operation that was important. The Allies then had to maintain like an umbilical cord, a supply line running back to places just like this, just to make sure that all of that hard-fought land, the hard-won land, was not to be lost again. And so these landing craft would come back here, come back from northern France. It was a very dangerous journey, one they'd do again and again and again. And they would come alongside, broadside too, and they would land in a type of cradle as the tide would go out. They'd be then hauled up, these great concrete ribs, up to platforms up here. There's the remains of one just there. And there they could be worked on, they could be inspected, and they could be repaired. But it's the scale of it, I think, that's so important, so difficult to grasp. The Allies used over 4,000 landing craft tanks to get their vehicles across to northern France, and there would have been hundreds of them massed here just before the operation in June 1944. I like to think of Agatha Christie up there in Greenway looking down, wondering what on earth was going on. These landing craft were enormous. I'm just standing here trying to visualise several resting here being inspected, but I can't. Only one survives in the UK. It's in Portsmouth. I'd urge you all to go and have a look at it. Each one could carry 10 tanks. That's how big they were. And what an effort it would have been to drag them on their cradles up this slipway. There are strong points hidden away above the waterline in the wood with old rusty chains attached to them. Just give you a sense of the industry, the busyness. Now it's all just deserted. You could just hear the cry of gulls, not the cursing of American voices. Amazing. Well, it's nearly the end of the day and the tide has come in a bit, which has allowed us to get round to somewhere called Old Mill Creek. It's just a little creek just round the corner from Dartmouth. And just on the edge here is one of my favourite wrecks. It's got a cracking story. This is the remains of a ship called the Mayfly, a Victorian paddle steamer. That's why the Dart is so important. Not one but two old paddle steamers here. And the Mayflower's got a wonderful story. So she was built in the 1890s and then came down from Liverpool to Dartmouth when they needed a ship for the isolation of infectious disease cases. There'd been a terrible outbreak of smallpox in Dartmouth in the 1860s and another in the 1870s, and it was decided they needed somewhere for those patients to recover, to quarantine them, to make sure that they didn't infect anyone else while they got better. We know she was a paddle ship. We know that by the end of her life she was in a really very sorry state indeed. We know that she could hold 25 patients, but at this stage in her life she was really quite old, quite run down. And in 1919 she's declared unfit for human habitation. It does make me feel a little sorry for those people who might have been so ill that they had to be put on that ship. Leaking rooms, filling up with water. Very horrible indeed. It's a magnificent survival, this, and it's such powerful evidence for the fear of infectious disease. Smallpox was around for millennia. They found smallpox pores in the lungs of an Egyptian mummy, 3000 BC. They started to discover ways of beating it in the 18th century, 1790s, there's a vaccination. But it's not until 1980 that smallpox is actually eradicated. I love this part of the Dart, Old Mill Creek, because not only do you have this hulk of a paddle ship, but there's another one there, and there's another one over there. And when you get your eye in, you suddenly see shapes of ships everywhere. That's because there used to be a shipbreaker's yard just around the corner. And if ever there was a patch of foreshore that deserved to be called a ship graveyard, then this is definitely it. The flood tide has taken us all the way up Old Mill Creek, and it's a wonderful place to finish. We've got this castle behind us. It's not an actual castle, not a medieval castle. It was built as a bathing house in the 18th century by the local MP. Some people say it's wrong to go past historical objects and not question what they are, but I love it. I call it nurturing your wonder of history. And the history you see, you kind of absorb it through your bones. It sits just behind your blind spot. But it's so valuable nonetheless. You don't need to know dates and stories all the time. Sometimes it's enough just to feel history. And coming to somewhere like this where you can see it on the shoreline everywhere you look, there are two more hulks over there. But all of that does depend on there being some history to see, to appreciate. And how long is all of this going to be here for? 10 years? 20 years? Only time will tell. But what a wonderful place to spend that time.